Welcome to Mental Iron episode number 8. Today we're talking about obsessive compulsive disorder, and I have a special guest today. Welcome to my show today, Shaun. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Leslie. It's a pleasure.
So for people who aren't familiar with obsessive compulsive disorder, we use the short term OCD. So just to give you an idea of what that is, the two main features of OCD are having obsessions, which are repeating thoughts, and compulsions, which are repetitive behaviors. So, Shaun, what makes you think that you have OCD?
Well, where do I start? It's for me, OCD. I'm not diagnosed with it, but I know that I have it. It comes from everything into my life, from bodybuilding to business to how I am. I go away on a holiday and I unpack my suitcase, and it's like underwear, socks, jocks, however it goes. Set that up. And basically just, in my business, with simple stuff like emails, I go through the emails and it's almost like they all need to be completed all the time. If not, I just sit on the edge that I'm missing something or I'm, not on the ball. So, it just, even with bodybuilding, from missing a meal, I work myself up that much that I'm going to miss a meal, that I sort of start to freak out a little bit, so basically what it does is it makes me really organise everything in my life just so I'm not on edge, I'm not so anxious all the time. So, yeah, that's how I do it.
And that's the compulsions. So the compulsions are those behaviors to help manage the anxiety. Because when we feel that we're in a bit more control of our situation, and let's face it, it helps us become more efficient in our day when we're organized. So just so people know, just being organized does not mean you have OCD. So let's talk about organization for you, Shaun. How does that negatively impact? We can talk about how organization is great, but how does it negatively impact you, either personally or professionally?
Personally, I have a routine when I get up in the morning. I get up, have a shower, go take my supplements, have breakfast, have a coffee, go to work. Now, for some reason, if that's not followed, I really struggle with it. And even to the point where, if I'm on holidays and stuff like that, and things change, I try and sleep in, I try and do something differently, and just the start of the day is never the same for me. And even to the points where, I feel that really that out of sorts, where I'll go jump back to bed, and I'll simulate, I lay in bed, and I'll, for 5 minutes, and then I'll simulate getting up, and then I'll get up and I'll go have a shower, and then I'll follow that routine. And following that routine, it makes me feel a lot better, and it's great. It looks weird because I've been up for 2 hours, go back to bed, lay in bed for 5 minutes like a weirdo, and then get back up, but it just helps me reset and put everything in perspective the right way. So, and that can take time, and life is a changing thing, especially if you've got kids or anything like that. Things change around, and so it's definitely impacts on certain ways.
So a lot of people do have morning routines. What makes, again, I just want to kind of distinguish from the average person who has that routine of getting up in the morning. What makes your situation a little different?
It's just if I don't follow the routine, it's like something's wrong. In my mind, there's something going on that's wrong, and it's not a thing where I'm going to run away, but it's just almost like, I think it comes down to a little bit like I've got a bad memory, and that sort of thing. Short-term memory, I think, is a little bit shit. And so what can happen is I feel like I'm missing something. So if I don't follow the routine, it's like I can go on routine and go on autopilot, and I can do it, and it's great, I feel good. No, I haven't missed anything. Or, if I don't follow that routine, I'm jumping in the car and I'm on my way to work. And I'm like, did you take tablets? And it's like, yeah, I took the tablets. I'm like, sure. And you're like, because that's normally the second thing you do when you get up. Now, the second thing done today was brush your teeth instead of, whatever, and something shit. Yeah. And sometimes I forget, literally forget, So it's actually a compulsion, but it makes me anxious and it makes me feel like something is wrong. But when I get it right, it's perfect. It's impossible, But when it's wrong, is something out of place or whatever it is, it's just in your head. So
So when you forget something in your routine, and let's say you're in the car, you forgot to do whatever, like take pills or whatever. How do you respond at that point in time? Do you turn around, go home, or what do you end up doing?
Yeah, so luckily I work for myself, so I can turn around and go home and take the tablets, and then go through my morning routine while I'm at home. All right, what have I done? I've done this and that. I even paced out. All right, I've done this and that. Yeah, cool. Okay, I'm right to go to work now. Yeah, there's been times where like I've got a meeting and I can't do that,
Right.
and like it just painful. You know, I get to work and I'm like going to have this meeting, and it's just like something is out of sort and something's wrong. You know, something's going to happen. You know, and it's nothing. It's like you forgot your tablets. Like it's nothing. To an average person, it's nothing. But for me, it's a big thing. So, yeah.
And that's the thing with OCD. A lot of people with OCD, Shaun, they know that, hey, I think I might be blowing this out of proportion. It's not the end of the world. It's an annoyance, because it's bugging you, but it's not the end of the world. If you have to wait till, let's say, after your meeting, if you have to run home and then you take whatever it is or do whatever it is that you forgot, and then you come back. Again, it's not like, the world's falling apart, but it's going to bug you, and you may be able to go in that meeting and you can't focus on the meeting because you're thinking about, why did I forget taking those pills?
Yeah. And see, for me, it goes into many different aspects. Like, I've got it with work, and I also got it with bodybuilding because I want to be successful in bodybuilding. Like, I want to hard work and get it right, and I like to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but not taking tablets, I'm not taking tablets, supplement bodybuilding, like, up level, because I'm not doing that. I'm not doing everything I can do on that day to achieve my goals, and then it just it just snowballs. So that's why it's easy for me to turn around, go home, take the tablets, make sure I'm right, yeah, cool, okay, and it just helps reset that at the start of the day. And it's a funny thing. It's like I've worked with Dave Palumbo, and if he gives me a good review, my day's great. If he gives me a shit review when I check in, life's dead. Like it's not good. So, and it can be nothing that I've done. It's just my body hasn't responded that week for a certain way. But it's funny how, like with OCD, and also just I like to have everything right. I like to have everything in order, done properly. And when it doesn't go to plan, it definitely plays a part in my life.
And the thing is, Shaun, you can do, let's say you never forgot anything, theoretically speaking. So that wasn't one of your anxieties. You never forgot anything. You could, as a bodybuilder, you could do everything by the book. And let's say you don't get results. Why? Well, there could be some other factors outside of you. But let's just focus on, what could be going with you personally as a bodybuilder. It could be your stress levels from other things could be impacting. Because as we know, again, you could be totally on point on your plan, your meal plan. You could be really hitting it hard on the weights. But if your stress levels are really high, your body's not going to respond the same.
Yeah, definitely. And there's definitely been times like that because I'm pretty anal with the OCD. And it's like, I follow my meals, and even to the point where, like, I tell Dave if I have the slightest thing off my diet, because, I want him to know exactly what's happening so that he can make the changes correctly and he's not double guessing what he can do. And I remember I gave him a review on, I had a couple of donuts to cheat meal. It was about 8 weeks out from my first show. And I had a couple of donuts, and I had a roast dinner, and I had some pie. And I told Dave I had 2 donuts, I had some apple pie, and Dave came back and said, if you ever have a destructive meal like that ever again, I'll give you a bowl of oats. That's right, I feel. Now, the average person might would have gone, I'm going to say no, but he won't know. But for me, again, that old OCD, wanting him to be on point with everything that's going in my mouth, told him that and gave him a bad review, and I knew it was going to come, I knew it was going to happen, but I still did it. So, yeah, and I definitely do think that with stress levels too. There's been times, like it's funny, it was about 3 weeks out from my last show, and they had me doing cardio. I put 2 hours of cardio.
Mm-hmm.
My body was just hitting this point where it just wouldn't lose weight. But then they would back cardio off and he'd feed me carbs, and the body would drop the weight. It was just working backwards. And I definitely think, my life is very stressful.
Well, that's what we're going to do. Try to start working on. I mean, there's the stress of, working and like the mental stress. Not it's more mental than it is physical as far as getting ready for a competition. I tell people, yeah, there's a physical component 100%, but it's more mental.
Yep.
So, but we're talking about and that'll be another show. But I mean, we're talking about the stress that you're having because of the OCD.
Yeah.
So let's go into for the bodybuilders out there. What is something? Is it taking those tablets? Is it what else? What are there some other kind of compulsions you would have when it comes to bodybuilding?
Missing meals, taking meals are late. I've got a set time that I like basically every day. So wake up 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 11 to 4:30, and then about 6:30 is my meal times, and they are when I'm comp prepping, it's like on the minute. To the point where I don't need to set an alarm, my body just tells me, it's like, well, who knows? But, if that's okay when I work in the office and my business in Baramba, because I've got all the facilities there. I've got all the facilities there to cook food and all that sort of stuff, and that's great. But, with my other business, incubation company, where I can be in a truck or in the middle of nowhere, and those facilities, change meals and try and change the plan, but then you start thinking, all right, am I having too many shakes, or am I not having enough real food, or this is different than last time? You're going to get the same results last time. Always good thoughts, and it just stresses you.
A good way to manage a lot of stress is having a backup plan. No matter, like, if you know that you're going to a different location, let's say, not your office where you can come and go, but let's say, or you're visiting a client or something like that, always have a backup. And worst case scenario, this is what I tell people. People are really focused on the worst case scenario. And I'm like, okay, well, have a game plan of the worst case scenario. We don't want it, but if it happens, let's say you get stuck in traffic. And it takes you longer to get home, and it's like, there was an accident on the highway. It took you an hour, so you're like an hour late in getting your meals in. Put it into perspective. That 1 hour is not going to make a difference in your prep if you've been doing everything else right. You have to keep in mind, it's not if you make one mistake, it's shot. When it comes to, let's say, I'm not saying go off on your meal plan and binge. I'm talking about if you're having your meal, yes, you want to have it scheduled. But if life gets in the way, keep in mind, it's about putting into perspective, does this happen every day? Or is this one of those one-offs? Because if it's a one-off, your body's going to recover. But telling ourselves that up here is a little hard when our insecurities, we second guess ourselves. Oh, I just messed up my prep because I just missed a meal. We want to be perfect. And I'm going to do another show on perfectionism. But, we want to be perfect, but we're human beings. And then there's something called life. It's how you adapt that's going to be a key component on whether you're going to be able to do really well on the show or not. Yes, you need consistency. Yes, you need to follow the plan. But if you end up stressing so much about your one-off days that you can't get that shake in or whatever that next meal is, that's going to create more havoc, because it's going to create the stress, which is going to actually put you even further behind, because you're stressing out so much and your body's not going to be able to respond properly because your cortisol levels are through the roof. So a lot of this, what I'm telling you, is going to be self-talk. We're really good at putting ourselves down. When I ask everybody, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm my worst enemy. Yeah, okay, well, let's talk about how can you be, your best, you be your own version of your best coach. So I'm not saying replace your coach. I'm saying, in addition, I need you to work on, like, if most people can say, hey, my weakest body part is X, and I'm not talking about necessarily injury. It's just like, a lot of us are not necessarily complete, or even those guys who are complete, they still want to do something, whether it's get bigger or more conditioned or whatever. They always want to improve something. Same thing up here. This has to be done. Bodybuilders don't train this. Yes, they do the mind-muscle connection when they're training, but they're not doing the connection they need to do up here and strengthen it like a muscle. Like that, that's your weakest muscle for bodybuilders. Our minds are our weakest muscle. And how many bodybuilders are training their brains to be able to be stronger, to deal with those moments, whether it's life gets in the way, whether it's the anxiety, whether it's like the OCD, whether there's like, say, a death in the family, whether there's, relationship issues, whether there's a whole bunch of life can happen. How do we adapt as bodybuilders to be able to improve on that? I don't know many bodybuilders who actually train their brains.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what I'm really trying to get across to people, is how important this mental game coaching is. So, for you, what I would say, like, and anyone who's watching can try, partially, like, this is not, again, when I work with people, I go really more into detail. I'm just trying to keep it superficial for people, because what the technique I will use with one person can be very different than the technique I use for another. The reason for that is two people can have anxiety, two people can have OCD, and it could be the same kind of compulsion, such as, I have to have things very organized. So two OCDs, but the underlying reason for the anxiety for you might be different than the underlying anxiety for somebody else. That's why I'm very focused on doing one-on-one training, because it's very individualized. It's not cookie cutter.
Yeah, definitely.
So for you, and only as much as you're comfortable sharing, have you done any internal work as far as, Shaun, reflecting on where this anxiety started for you?
I've done a bit of therapy and stuff like that. I went through a divorce about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've done some therapy, to deal with that. And I think anxiety, I've got definitely a perfection thing where I want to achieve, and I don't like things getting in the way when I'm trying to achieve. And there's certain goals, and there's certain things I want to do. But yeah, I've never really. It's almost like an overachiever sort of syndrome or something like that, where it's like, I know where I want to be, I know where I'm capable of being. There's nothing that's going to get in the way to stop it. But when something does get in the way, it just irritates me. Then I don't know. It's definitely a form of anxiety, but it also really irritates me. It's like that meal, or whatever it is. It's like just annoys me that I can't do what I got to do. It's stopping me from where I want to go and what I want to do, and just annoys me completely. So yeah. So somewhere along the lines, of that control or something like that, I decided where I want to be, where I can see myself, and trying to achieve that. And yeah.
I want you to think of it almost like, what's the best form of training? When you're doing weights, it doesn't matter the body part. There's so many different versions of training. So if we're talking about how do we get from A to B, there's more than one route. Right now, for people, and I'm focusing right now on OCD, people with OCD, they've developed this pattern of getting from A to B, and that's all they know. They've stuck with it. That's their comfort zone. And when I say comfort zone, I'm not saying you feel comfortable doing these things. It gives you comfort that you can do something to help manage the anxiety by staying on top of things. And there's pros and cons. Like bodybuilders, if they're not organized, if they don't stay on top of things, they're not going to do well. They're not going to have the consistency both in and out of the gym if they're not on top of things. So it does have pros. I want people to understand that. It's the negatives, like you were saying, is that if it impacts other things, so let's say you miss that meal, then that could go into your headspace if you're about to go train. Oh, I didn't give myself at least an hour before I go in, because you want to digest in more than an hour if you're going to do legs or something like that. But as far as, okay, this has to happen like this, and if it doesn't, I'm going to have a shitty workout. And then you go into your workout, and you may not necessarily have had a shitty workout, but because it's in your mind, oh, I didn't digest properly or long enough, I'm going to feel gross. That can have an effect on how you train that day.
Totally.
So it's almost like I'm trying with not doing a lobotomy. We're going to rewire your brain, Shaun. If you stick with me, we're going to rewire your brain. And what we're going to do is, instead of going from A to B the way that you've been going in this designated route, I'm going to shift it just a little bit. So I'm not saying don't be on top of things. You're still going to be organized. But it's the when you're not or something falls through the cracks, I want to coach you on how to take a different route to still get to that end route, that the end go, whether it's on stage, whether it's doing a PR, whatever it might be, whatever your goal is.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're not going to have the thought. You're still going to have the thought, but you're going to do something else instead.
Yeah, cool.
So you and I are going to talk a little bit more and dig it down as far as what's going to be applicable to your situation. So we'll do some work about that if you're willing to go down that route.
Definitely, yeah. Sure.
Do you remember approximately how old you were when you had your first kind of compulsion?
Yeah, I don't really remember exactly, but I don't think I was like this as a child. So it was more probably like a early, maybe 18, 20, something around that, maybe, when we moved out of home. I think it was when I moved out of home and I started setting up the house, and I started like, all right, well, this is my house, with my furniture, so I want to put it there and do this and do that. So yeah, probably about 18.
Yeah, late teens, early 20s is typical, a very typical onset age for OCD. So you're normal in that way. How's that feel? But again, it's the compulsion of saying the anxieties to say, hey, can we get your anxiety to come down without doing the compulsion? And that's what we need. That's where the rewiring comes in. So I want you to choose one compulsion. It doesn't matter. It's about something we've talked about or maybe something we haven't talked about that you would like some help with.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, like at the moment, I've got my business, and business has got a few little issues with it, nothing major, very normal stuff that would be in business, but it's been affecting me in a way that I haven't been able to train for. And, it's almost like there's that much stress going on. Whereas I was in New South Wales, I've got my business in Western Australia, which is like literally on the other side of Australia. And so I had to come over and sort of get things out. And it's funny, like the last couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, I've been cutting down, trying to lose weight, and it's funny, like as the stress goes up, I just haven't been able to train. Like, I mean, I've been that exhausted and that tired, and I'm doing cardio and I'm doing no carbs and stuff like that. But I mean, I'm more exhausted than I normally would be. Definitely like a stress thing. So I want to learn how to go, right, well, because in my mind with the OCD, it's like, all right, well, there's a pecking order of things that are important, and it's like the business running is number one, then it's bodybuilding, and then, yada, yada, yada. And it's almost like when the top thing is not running properly, I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
I just can't focus. And to the point where I thought that it might be time, so I took a couple of weeks off work, and all I did was just housework and chill out at home and spend time with my son. And I had this 2 weeks, and I still felt stuff, after it. So, been able to, I don't know, somehow go, right, well, that's not working now, but you're going to deal with that in a couple of weeks. So it's still important to you that you train. So segregating those, great, yeah.
And you're right, Shaun. When we have anxiety, it tends to have a trickle down effect. So, for people who have jobs outside of bodybuilding, it can absolutely affect your work. And then if your work isn't going well, then how we actually end up overcompensating by trying to do more control, let's say in our bodybuilding behaviors. And if that's gone awry because we have the lack of motivation because of what's going on with work, it's like this, this rotating wheel, like a hamster on a wheel, just goes over and it feels like there's no end in sight, and we can spin out of control. And then the behaviors can actually escalate. Despite our anxiety going up, our behaviors, those compulsions can escalate. But because of where our mind is at and we're not getting the results that we want, the anxiety is not being satiated whatsoever. So again, it's just this recurring cycle, and then people can spin out of control.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yep, that makes sense.
So it's how to regain control without doing the compulsions. And that's where we have to dig down deep, because compulsions are called with our surface. I call them, compulsions are like a Band-Aid. When you have a wound, you put a Band-Aid on it, it stops the bleeding, but it doesn't make it heal.
Yeah.
If you put a special ointment, that can help your wound heal faster. So basically, we need to get to the root of the anxiety.
Yeah, cool.
You know, for you, and again, only with what you're comfortable with, it's not just the compulsions. I want to look at the specific anxiety. Now, let's talk. I don't know if you want to talk about the business piece, again, whatever you're more comfortable with, or the bodybuilding piece, about
Okay.
what's the most pressing anxiety that you have.
Being successful.
Okay.
Is my biggest, being successful at any cost.
Define successful for you.
Successful, hundreds of millions of dollars, living a lifestyle that I want to. Don't have to answer to anyone. Don't have to ask anyone to do anything. I can just do whatever I want, whenever I want, comfortably.
You want financial freedom.
Financial freedom. Yeah, exactly right.
Okay. So if you had financial freedom, then what? What's going to make you happy after that?
Take a holiday.
Okay, assume you go for a holiday. What comes after that?
From after that, then I would really just, I've got financial freedom, I'm living lifestyle I want to live. Then it would be health and fitness and bodybuilding and just doing things I like. Working out, going to the gym, make my body, probably competing as well. But yeah, it'd be exactly basically what I'm doing. It's just I would be free of, I don't know, if it's failure or whatever it is, but yeah.
I'm not sure if you heard what you said. So you would be doing the same thing that you're doing right now, except fill in those blanks?
Yeah, except I'd be doing exactly what I was doing now, except to just be, what did I say? Financially free. Okay.
But if you're doing what you want anyway,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out, okay, you're doing what you want. What's the extra if you had the financial freedom? Because right now you're saying you don't have financial freedom, correct?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I've got financial freedom to a certain point, but I mean, and not where I want it to be. I want it to be up here, where, for an average person, I go, all right, I do well. But for what I want, it's like I want to be wealthy.
Okay.
Next generations, good generations of my family set up, and stuff like that. So, yeah.
So money is important.
Definitely money's important for sure.
What if, and I hope you get there, but what if you don't?
I'll be like, rapper, Get Rich or Die Trying. What's his name? Anyway, basically, I don't know. I think as long as I try absolutely everything in my possible power to get there, and if I don't get there, I go, well, you know what, I've unturned every stone and I've done everything I possibly could. And yeah, I didn't quite get there. Oh, well, yeah.
Basically, if you do your best, you got to forget the rest.
Yeah, exactly right. Do my best, push as hard as I can, use the avenues I can. Like, I know I can do it. It's just, getting there, arriving.
Okay, specify that. Arriving at what? The financial freedom, or accepting your fate if you're not able to get to that level?
Like, I can't accept that I'm not going to get to that level. I know that I will, and I'm capable of doing it. I know I can do it. So it's just finding the avenue and arriving. So finding the vehicle that's going to get me there, and arriving there and do what I need to do to get there. And that also gives me, that fight's bodybuilding too, because bodybuilding can be such a very intense thing where it takes up a lot of your time. And as we all know, it pays absolutely nothing. And so I've only really restructured these goals probably over the last, because with the OCD, I go, right, well, this year I'm going to do bodybuilding comp. I'm going to go, right, I've done bodybuilding comp. Next year I'm going to get
Mm-hmm.
and then clashing. It's clashing because I'm like, well, I've got to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to eat my meal. And just that stopping eating my meal is making me really anxious. It's like, I'm pushing hard enough. Not pushing hard enough in work. So then I push hard at work and I miss a meal, and then I'll go, I'm pushing hard enough in bodybuilding. And it's almost like it's just constantly fighting each other. So,
what's wrong with having your meal at work?
yeah, definitely. Like if it's in a situation where I'm in office, it's great. It's when I'm not in the office and when I'm out for a day in the middle of nowhere. So I looked at buying a generator, and then a microwave, putting that in the truck and stuff like that. Is what I do.
So you've come up with a plan on how to deal with that particular issue.
Definitely. But it's funny that because they fight each other, it's just like constant battle, and then that battle almost like just wears you out, like emotionally, mentally, physically. So I just want to go home and sit down and do nothing. It's gross. You just almost like constantly war with yourself. It's yeah.
But let's look at the war in the brain that's going on. I feel that and not just you, I feel that people, especially with anxiety disorders, spend way too much time and energy on not accepting the truth, that they may have unrealistic expectations. Shoot for the stars. It's like, you want to be Mr. Olympia? Okay, shoot for it.
Yeah.
But, you can do everything right, and you might not be Mr. Olympia. Does that mean you shouldn't train? No. And that's where we might have to be able to, retune our expectations to saying, if we don't get, in this case, if you don't become that billionaire, let's say, okay, or whatever that number is, I'll say billionaire just for the sake of it. If you're not becoming, you'll take $1 billion, will you, Shaun? Okay. All right. So you want to make more money than Elon Musk, go for it. But I mean, I'm not saying you can't strive for it, but if you expect it, to saying, okay, can you accept? You don't have to like it. Can you accept the quality of life that it might be more than what you have right now? And if you've done everything in your power, including mistakes and learning from mistakes, it's not about perfection. If you were to live a perfect life, you'd be so boring. How much would you learn? You don't learn without making mistakes. This is how we get better. We make mistakes and we learn from it. Okay? People are so afraid of making mistakes. I'm like, this is how we get more information.
Yeah,
You want to, I'm not saying try to make a mistake. I'm saying if you innocently make a mistake, game plan, like you said, if you have to invest in something so you can travel, get the generator, and be able to have your food on the road, okay, there's your solution. Is it as easy as someone who doesn't have to do that? Yes, but you're doing what you have to do, because if you didn't do that job, you wouldn't be able to bring the income to pay for your bodybuilding expenses. So it's trying to put things into perspective, to saying, okay, if it's the worst case scenario that your version of success is not reaching that number, I would invite you to reevaluate that. If you don't make that amount of money, I'm not saying don't try, I'm saying if you don't, your backup is knowing that you did everything and you game plan what that would be. So if you don't have that generator, start a budget, do your research. What are you going to buy and when can you buy it? Put it more into action. But a lot of times people get caught in their heads of, oh my gosh, when I travel, I'm not going to have this, I'm not going to have that. Plan it. Because most of the time we're not going to have last minute trips. We know when we're going to travel, or if we're going to see a client that's out of town or whatever. So it's trying to say, okay, you might need a cooler. You might have to eat cold fish. Won't be the first time, probably won't be the last time. It's kind of like you do what you got to do. So it's a lot of it's planning. It's not getting stuck in the, oh my gosh, if this doesn't happen, my world's going to fall apart. It's just saying it's going to be inconvenient, but this is my game plan. This is what I'm going to do and put it in its place. And that's not compulsive behavior. That's problem-solving behavior. And that's what I want to really coach yourself and other people with, is more problem-solving behaviors by managing expectations as far as what your goals are. And again, I'm not saying don't shoot for the moon.
Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, put those expectations into place and put a plan, an actionable strategy into place to make sure you get as many of those bases covered. At the end of the day, as long as you do your best, again, you forget the rest. You're gonna, and I say that meaningfully, but I know it's hard to forget. But like a muscle, when you train it on this new pathway. I'm telling you, your mind's gonna naturally resist it. So I'll just give you a heads up. But in time, it's like people who, let's say, I went through a period of time where I was squatting and my form was bad and I didn't know it. And I was squatting that way for like years. Then I had someone tell me, no, this is the way you squat. I had to relearn how to do my squat, so I had to drop my weights and I had to start all over again. In a different way, it's kind of like that. If you have to retrain, in this case, your brain, to do this activity, to, instead of doing a compulsion, to do a problem solving behavior and managing expectations, that can carry you a long way. Again, it takes time to build. It takes time for me to get back up to the weights I did before, but doing proper squat technique as an example. So again, instead of training the muscle, we're training up here. If you want to consider the brain a muscle.
It's funny because everything I do is, like I said before, it's like, this is the order.
Right.
The order can't be the order. And I've changed the goals where I want to focus more on business, and I'm going to do a business course over in Scotland in 4 months. So I've got all that happening, and for me to be able to do that, I need to sort of not back the bodybuilding off, but my brain is like, all right, well, that is now number one. Bang, bodybuilding does take up too much, they get pushed to the side. But I know for me, bodybuilding is such a big part of my life that keeps me structured and it keeps me happy, training. So it's like, oh, maybe I just don't do a comp, maybe I train, try and get my body to a place where maybe in a couple of years, I really fights that self. It's like, I'm not honest. This, and then I've got the business where it's like, well, I want to do this, and then just go.
And it's about priorities. If you're not training for a show, and I'm not saying don't train, when you're focusing on your business, that's going to take the big chunk of your day, let's say. I'm not saying you can't train. You may not be able to train the way you want, but then make it fun. Do something that you're not used to doing. Have some different types, whether it's trying a different training style just to try it out. It might be doing something that, no, I'm not a big cardio fan, but I remember doing some plyometric training. I don't know if you've ever done that. That's nasty stuff, I'll tell you. But I mean, it's trying to shake things up. So if bodybuilding isn't going to be your focus, but you still want to be fit, make it interesting. Do something that you wouldn't normally do in a bodybuilding. I don't mean foolishly, but like I said, it could be a different training style. Just so you're interested in it, even though you're focusing on the business. Because that's the thing, we have to keep it interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And, I worked with Dave and, I've changed the plan a couple of times over the last 8 months. And, so now we're cutting, and I was just going to cut down and get, it's like when you're in comps shape and then you do a really big, heavy off-season, you walk around. And it's like, so I just want to get back lean again and look good, and then just maintain that. Then just, just go and train, eat some carbs, and just, grow a little bit, but I don't want to get fat, or I don't want to get, I just want to maintain lean and do a lean bulk. And
lean bulks are great, yeah.
Yeah, just try and get a bit better and just try and get a bit better quality muscle, because I'm not done with competing. And it's hard because I am such a there's nothing gets in my way. Always problem solve, always push things to the side and just get to where I want to get. But, it's funny with the business thing, it's where I really want to go. And it's almost like, well, I'm going to achieve that goal first, and then I'll come back to bodybuilding later, So
bodybuilding isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But the business could. And, when you think about your goal, like I said, I'm not saying you can't strive for it, but that's where your attention needs to be until it's more on a solid track, and then you can come back to bodybuilding.
Makes sense.
Okay.
It's like it's not that, but it's, it's reassuring if someone else tells you.
You know, we're like racehorses at the starting line, and we're like foaming at the mouth. We just can't wait. You know, so, and it's hard. Patience is actually probably our weakest muscle. Patience in our mind. So it's learning how to prioritize, and sometimes we don't want to prioritize things outside of bodybuilding,
Yeah.
but it's really important to do because it's going to make us ultimately more complete bodybuilders in the end, because one day we're going to stop competing. You know, one day, not to say we're ever going to stop at the gym, but it won't be the same type of training, nor should it, because our joints won't like us very much if we do.
We're only one injury away, you know, not thinking in a negative mindset, but I mean, you can focus everything you've got into bodybuilding, pull like, you know, Dorian Yates said, pull a muscle, and then he's out, he's done.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, I look at things like, okay, on my deathbed, I know it's a cliche, you know, on my deathbed, am I going to look back and be happy? And it's like, well, you know, I can turn around and go, you know what, I was a really good bodybuilder, looks really good, and then I've got an injury or retired and just went back to being a normal person. Or, you know, am I going to be fulfilled there? It's like, no, I'm not going to be fulfilled there. You know, I'm going to be that person wealthy where I want to be. And yeah, I've done some bodybuilding and stuff on the side. It was cool, you know, but like, I don't want to be a pro. Like, I don't have that, I want to be a pro, and take it wrong, if I was good enough and, you know, got a pro card, it'd be great. But I mean, it's not my biggest goal. Biggest goal was going back and winning the show that I lost. And I did do that. But, you know, I'll definitely improve a bit better, and I was probably only a couple of spots away from it. So, yeah, it's just allowing yourself, because the problem we've got is that, like, all us bodybuilders have got this mentality of, like, we would go, like we talked about before, you know, we'd break our arm, so we'd start using the other arm, you know, and it's sort of allowing yourself to not give up, just, you know, slow down a bit. And it's hard.
It's so hard to slow down.
Yeah.
On so many levels, but yeah, because that's the thing. When you're an athlete, you don't want to settle for mediocre.
No.
Like, we're not just talking about bodybuilders, but I mean, there's any kind of athlete. If you're competitive, you have any kind of competitive nature. Slowing down is the least thing, the last thing on your mind, basically. We want to make improvements, but the problem is that sometimes, to our detriment, we overdo it, myself included. So it's about sometimes having someone else to be accountable to say, hey, pull back a little bit. Because it's almost like we need permission, Shaun. We need permission from, let's say, someone else who's like in the bodybuilding industry or someone we respect to say, no, it's okay to take a day off or maybe a week off. You know, or maybe even more than that. Or to change your training style, or don't go so heavy, or do this instead. Or, you know, whatever it might be, it's kind of like we need that, almost that, and I say the word permission, to feel that it's okay. We need that validation. It's okay to back off, because as athletes, that's not where our brain goes.
Yeah, definitely. It's like we talked about before, when I used to kickbox and stuff like that, I had a calf injury. And, you know, so when I got it fixed, compartment syndrome of calves, when I got that fixed, I had another 3 fights. And I mean, I could barely run, could barely skip, couldn't get fit. And I mean, but I just wouldn't stop. I just wouldn't give up, and I wouldn't, you know, it got to the point where I was just, you know, I got to my last fight, I broke my wrist, you know, I was dehydrated, because how I used to make weight is I just stop eating. Just stop eating, and just, you know, just fade away. And so by the time we get in the ring, I'm like depleted and dying, and, you know, broke my wrist, I was dehydrated, my calves and stuff. And you know, I lost that fight. And still to this day, I'm like, you know, we'll go back, you know, you had a shit fight, so we'll go back. And, you know, now I'm getting nearly 40, and it's like, mate, giving myself permission to go, no, you just let that go. The part of your life, you just let that go. And, you know, again, kickboxing, bodybuilding, all these, you know, things as pros make nothing, no money, you know, not enough to support your family. So, yeah, but it's just allowing yourself, to go, no, it's okay. You can close the door on this, and you can open another door and move forward. And until you do that, you don't move forward. And it's still like, you know, I wake up some mornings thinking about kickboxing. You know, I'm like, oh, you know, even though I'm about 40 kilos heavier than I used to fight. So, yeah, all right.
There's a price to be paid when you're an athlete, and there's time when you need to stop paying that price.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, it's time to pivot in a different direction. Now, I'm not saying don't train.
Yeah.
And you might end up competing in a different sport, it could be, nothing to do with weights. Some people become runners, it could be, those, people who do those fun tricks on bikes and stuff. I mean, like, there's so many different things that people can do. And that's why I usually advocate for people to have some type of interest or job outside of bodybuilding. And I'm not saying you can't make a career out of bodybuilding. I'm not saying anything against people who do, but I'm saying after bodybuilding, what are you going to do? What's your backup plan? Or what, because you need to be mentally able to make that transition. And I think I told you before we started this podcast that, retirement in bodybuilding is not really talked about enough, as far as not just talking about it, but talking about solutions. So that's a later podcast. But today I'm with the OCD, the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. Like I said, if you're willing to work with me, Shaun, we're going to dive more deeply into managing those expectations and doing those specific goal-oriented problem solutions to hit your goal, and rather than the compulsions.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect.
Well, once again, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate, Shaun, and I'll be touching base with you later, and I'll definitely be giving you a homework assignment.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Leslie. And it's really great what you and David are doing, and mental health, especially for us crazy bodybuilders and athletes, is a huge thing. So, good on you, and if there's anything I can ever do, all right.
Thank you much. I really appreciate it, Shaun. Have a great day.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Cheers.